Let me say something to you that might feel a little uncomfortable, but I see it all the time. Some of the strongest, some of the best, some of the most amazing nonprofit leaders that I know are quietly anxious about fundraising. They're great with people, they care deeply about their mission, they lead their teams well. But the moment a donor meeting pops up on their calendar, everything tightens. And somewhere along the way, they start telling themselves this story: I'm just not a fundraiser. But here's what doesn't make sense: if you're not a fundraiser, then why does your job depend on it? That tension, that disconnect, that is our focus on this episode. Let's huddle up. Hey, welcome to another episode of Huddle Up with Mark, the Fund Coach. I'm Mark Duncan. This is the space for nonprofit leaders who want to learn how to be the best fundraisers possible for their mission, even if they have no in house fundraising support. Now, most nonprofit leaders didn't step into this role of leadership, the executive director position, saying to themselves, I can't wait to ask people for money. Now, I may be the exception because I did step into my executive director role with that exact mindset, because I was in a role as a program director for a nonprofit, watching a capital campaign unfold and wanting to be involved because I did see the value in fundraising. So I'm probably one of those weird people, right, that stepped into that space knowing full well what I was getting into. But I also recognized along the way that those others that I knew who were my colleagues at other organizations, it was not something that they felt comfortable with. And that is the case across the board. And I completely understand that. And so, almost quietly, fundraising becomes this massive part of the job that you're in. Not what you expected when you walked in, but now all of a sudden you're expected to generate all of this support. And no one really sat down with you and said, by the way, your ability to fundraise, your ability to fund this mission is going to matter as much as your ability to lead it. I'm sure no one said that to you, but imagine if they did before you took this role. So when fundraising feels heavy or awkward or draining, many leaders assume something is wrong with them. What am I doing wrong? Why can't I do this? Why am I so uncomfortable? But that assumption is actually where the real damage starts. That beating up of yourself can actually do harm. So here's what I want you to hear very, very clearly in this episode. This is not a competence problem. Let me say that again. This is not a competence problem. Okay? You're not failing because you're incompetent. That is not the case at all. So if you're feeling that, you need to let that go. That is not your truth. I guarantee you that. You're struggling because fundraising was framed to you as something separate from leadership. It was framed to you, it was positioned to you as something separate from leadership. This is your job as executive director. And by the way, over here, you need to raise money. So somewhere along the way, fundraising got labeled as sales or pressure or persuasion. And if that doesn't align with your values, your personal values, and for most nonprofit leaders, it doesn't. Let's be real here. It doesn't align. Of course, you're going to resist it. And the resistance isn't the problem. It's the framing. The framing is the problem. Because fundraising is leadership. So let's talk about avoidance for a minute. Because almost every leader that I coach experiences some level of avoidance. Putting off donor meetings because something's come up, staying busy with grants, right? You're doing fundraising, you're staying busy with grants and events, right? Because that feels like you're accomplishing something without having to lean into relationships. And then most often, waiting until things feel super urgent before you start asking for money. Now you're doing it out of desperation. And avoidance often gets labeled as fear or procrastination. But I see it differently. Avoidance is usually protection. You're protecting relationships, you're protecting integrity, you're protecting yourself from feeling exposed or rejected. I want to say this clearly. Avoidance doesn't mean you don't care about your mission. Let me say that again. Avoidance doesn't mean that you don't care about your mission. It usually means that you care deeply. So, quite the opposite. And you don't want to do harm. So, we put things off, we avoid because we're protecting the integrity of the mission, the relationships that you've established that you're now shifting into fundraising and asking. You want to protect that. And you're also protecting yourself from feeling exposed or rejected. Now, here's the shift. This is the shift that challenges everything. You do not need to become a fundraiser. Let me say that again for the people in the back. You do not need to become a fundraiser. You need to expand your understanding and expand how you understand leadership. Because fundraising at its best isn't about convincing someone to give you lots of money. It's about inviting someone into impact, into making a difference in the lives of the people that you serve. That's why you took this job. That's leadership. And the fundraising aspect of this is an invitation. It's an invitation to people who have capacity so that they can be a part of this. So it's about leading a conversation around vision, around values, about what's possible to do. And just about anything is possible if you have enough resources. That is what excited me about fundraising to begin with. Framing it as if money was no object. So when fundraising becomes an expression of leadership instead of a performance, that fear actually starts to loosen its grip. You let go of that. You let go of that tightness and that expectation because it is an expression of leadership. It's just part and parcel of what you have to do to be successful as a leader on behalf of the people that you serve. And when you do this, suddenly those donor conversations, They don't feel like something you're pretending to be good at. They feel like something you're growing into. Think about that. Here's a question I want you to sit with as you listen to this and as you ponder this, even after this episode is over. What would change if you stopped saying, I'm not a fundraiser, and started asking, what kind of leader does this season require me to become? What kind of leader does this season require me to become? This is a season of your career. This is a season of your life in this organization that you're leading. So think about that and stop saying to yourself, I'm not a fundraiser. But then ask yourself, what kind of leader does this season require of me to be, to become? Because growth like that doesn't happen in isolation. Leaders grow when they have space to think, to practice, to be supported without any judgment. Without any judgment. Now, if something in this episode felt familiar, maybe even a little bit too familiar, because I talk about this often, I want you to hear this. You don't need more information. I could share all sorts of information and tips, which I have done throughout these episodes over the last almost 3 years now. Most nonprofit leaders don't struggle because they lack the knowledge. They struggle because they're trying to lead fundraising alone. So I encourage you to think about getting the support that you need, whether it's through coaching, working with me or someone or a colleague. With someone who can give you a place to slow down, get clear, practice real donor conversations, and grow into confident, relational fundraising leaders. Because the relationships now, when you recognize that fundraising is leadership, doesn't that feel much better when you're leaning into a relationship because you are leading to make the lives better for the people that you serve? See, what likely excited you about your role is the purpose, the mission, and that you get to lead that. Well, part of the leadership includes fundraising. So if you're ready to stop avoiding major gift conversations and start leading them with confidence and integrity, that's the work that I do. That's the work that others in this space do. And you don't have to decide anything right away, but it is something you should be thinking about. Fundraising is leadership. Stop saying to yourself, I'm not a fundraiser, and start asking the question, what is required of me to lead in this season of my career, in this season of my mission? I hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And as always, this fundraising thing, it's not about the dollars. It's about what the dollars do for the people that you serve. That is leadership. Thanks. And we'll see you next time.